My name is Davis. I'm one of the co-directors here at Veritas, and I heard a song recently that I've not been able to stop thinking about, and it's a song called Gotta Serve Somebody by Bob Dylan, which I'm only 28. I don't really care about Bob Dylan, but I do care about Timothy Chalamet, who recently played Bob Dylan in a biopic. Is it biopic or biopic? Biopic? I don't know if that's right. I think it's biopic. But he recently played Bob Dylan, which is why I'm listening to Bob Dylan for the first time at 28. And I can't stop thinking about the song because I think the message is really interesting. It's called Gotta Serve Somebody, and it goes like this. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing at you. The lyrics are, you may be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble, you might like to dance. But you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed, you're going to have to serve somebody. Go back just a second, please. So I think the message of that song is really interesting because I think you can get it really quickly, that no matter who you are, no matter what you're into, we all have to serve somebody, which I think to modernize that language a little bit, what he's saying here is that we all live for somebody or something, that we all build our lives around, that we follow, we listen to, we trust certain people in our lives or certain things in our lives. And I think the answer for who we follow and who we listen to is the person that we think is gonna bring us the good life. It's what we're looking for, right? Like we want the life where we're happy, or the life where we feel joy, or the life where we feel peace and contentment. And so the question is, who knows how to get it? Who knows where your best life is found? It's a provocative question, and it's so provocative that, and usually it's a rhetorical question, but somebody sought to answer that by responding with a song of their own. It was John Lennon from the Beatles, and he responded with a song called Serve Yourself. Again, not gonna sing at you, but here are the lyrics. It says, you gotta serve yourself. Ain't nobody gonna do it for you. You may believe in devils, you may believe in lords, but if you don't go out and serve yourself, lad, ain't no room service here. It doesn't rhyme. I don't know if it's not as good as the Bob Dylan song, but you get his message, right? Like it is a kind of you do you before we were saying that phrase. John Lennon's answer to the question, who knows best for your life? Well, it's you. Nobody else is gonna go give you the good life. They're not gonna bring it to you. They're not gonna tell you what makes you happy. You need to go decide that. And I think it's an important question, and so I wanna just sit with it for a second because there are a lot of answers out there. But who knows best for your life? Genuinely think about that. Who knows how to get to the good life? Who knows what the good life is and what that would look like for you? I think it's an important question to ask because I think in some ways that's why we come to college, at least part of it, right? Like we're looking to find the person who can tell us what is going to make us happiest. And I said this, but I think the reality is that a lot of people want to answer that question for you. I bet if you went and asked, your parents would have an answer to that question. Your boyfriend or girlfriend have an answer, your boss would have an answer, your professors would have an answer, your coach would have an answer, John Lennon has an answer. And so the question is, who actually knows? Whose answer is best? But the reality is that it's not just all of these people who have an answer, because Jesus also has an answer. And that's what we're gonna look at tonight in our passage. Jesus is gonna kind of spell out who gets to tell us what our best life is. And so we're in week 3 of our series going through the Sermon on the Mount, which is a sermon that Jesus gives on this hillside. He has tons and tons of people gathered, and he's able to project out to them. And some of them are his disciples, people who've been following him and are familiar with Jesus. And some of them are skeptics and religious leaders who don't like Jesus. And some of them are just people who have never heard Jesus talk. But he's giving this sermon, and I think in a lot of ways, the entire Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, what we're talking about all semester, is trying to answer that question. Who knows best for your life? And I think in our passage tonight, Jesus gives us a really clear answer. But I think it's a little tricky because clear does not necessarily always mean obvious. I think these verses can actually be like a little confusing at first. So I want to read them, and then I want to just kind of go back through them together slowly. So let's start, Matthew 5:17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So you see what I mean? It's a little bit cryptic, but I think it's helpful to know that when Jesus uses this phrase, the law or the prophets, or sometimes the law and the prophets, what he's referring to is the Old Testament. That's how people in Jesus' day talked about the Old Testament. So why is Jesus talking about fulfilling the Old Testament? Well, the Old Testament, it tells the story of who God is. It tells the story of why he made the world and how life is meant to work best. And at the center of that story is a question that is repeated pretty often throughout God's word. And it's, will humans trust God to define the good life? You see, like Nick talked about at the very beginning, from the beginning of time, we have a God who creates a good world. Why? Well, because he himself is good. And he places humans in it, not as prisoners or robots who just follow his will, but he places them as partners, people who are supposed to go and spread his goodness out throughout the entire world. And he gives these humans everything that they could possibly need. He gives them purpose, he gives them provision, he gives them relationship, and most importantly, he gives them himself. And there's only one thing that God asks from his people, and it's that they would trust him. You see, because God gives commands, or I guess to Adam and Eve, it was really just one command, because he's placed them in this garden, but there's a tree in this garden that God says, hey, if you eat from that tree in particular, it's going to lead to death. And so he gives them a command to not eat from it, but it's not to withhold their joy, but it's to protect them. He's asking them to trust him because he made them and he made everything and he knows what's best for them. But pretty much immediately, they decide that they know better. You know, like John Lennon says, centuries later, they choose to serve themselves. They choose to say that they know what's best for their lives, and so they're gonna do whatever they want. And the result is exactly what God warned them about. Brokenness occurs, shame pops up, and death enters the world. Things are no longer how they're supposed to be. But the good news for us is that the story, it doesn't end there. God does not walk away from this partnership with humanity. Instead, he chooses a particular people called Israel, and he gives them his law, which maybe you know is the 10 Commandments that we find in Exodus and some other laws that are on top of that. But God provides his people a law, and he doesn't do it as a burden. He's not trying to force them to live a particular way. He's trying to give them a road map. He's trying to give them a way towards the good life. He's showing them, hey, here is how life works best. Life works best when I am at the center of it, and you trust and submit and do as I say. But just like Adam and Eve, Israel, they struggle to trust God. Over and over and over again, they choose their own way. They look at this roadmap that God has given them and they say, no thanks, we know better. And over and over and over again, it leads to exactly what God said it would. It leads to pain and hurt. They hurt each other, they hurt their relationship with God, and it leads to more death and destruction. And so God, he still doesn't give up. So he goes on and he makes a promise to his people that one day a king will come. Somebody who will trust God perfectly. Someone who will show the world what real human flourishing looks like. And that's what Jesus is saying in this passage. When Jesus says that he came to fulfill the law and the prophets, which again is the Old Testament, he's saying, hey, I'm the one who this entire story is about. From the very beginning of creation, I am the one who was forming everything. From the very moment that we called a people, I was the one who was eventually going to come and do what they couldn't. You see, because Jesus, he's the only person to ever have fully trusted God. The only one who has ever lived in perfect obedience. And that perfect obedience, it leads Jesus to the cross. That is where God the Father sends him. And it's hard and it's painful, but Jesus, he bears our sin on the cross. He takes the consequences for our disobedience, all of the pain, all of the death, all of the destruction. He takes it on himself so that you and I wouldn't have to. And thankfully, again, that's not the end of the story. Because Jesus says that one day he's gonna return because he didn't stay dead. He rose again and he ascended to heaven and he says he's going to come back and he's gonna make all things new. That he's gonna bring us in the world back to what it was always meant to be. A world where people will flourish because they live in perfect harmony with their Creator. Where they submit to him and they trust him and they flourish because of it. So that question, who knows best for your life? Well, Jesus' answer is really clear. He's saying he does. Why? Well, because he's the creator, which means that he created everything, but he also created you, which means he knows best for you. And not just what's best for you, but he knows you personally. He knows what you want and what you need and what will satisfy you. But more than that, he loves you. And he gave his life for you to make a way for you to be back in right relationship with God so that you could have the kind of life that you were always made for from the very beginning. Jesus, he wants you to know that he is what's best for your life and that you can trust him. But he doesn't end our passage with just telling us who knows best for us. He goes on, and he goes on to tell us what trusting him actually looks like. So what does trusting Jesus look like? If he's the one who knows best for our life, then what does it look like to walk in trust with Jesus? That's what he tells us in verses 19 and 20. He says, therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But, go back a little. I'm not that fast of a reader, sorry. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. So that's kind of a wordy passage, but Jesus is saying, hey, some of you are tempted to set aside some of my commands. And if you are hearing that and you're like, I don't even know what God's commands are, that's great, because what's going to happen is the next several weeks, I don't know how many, but the next several weeks, what Jesus does in the following passages that we're going to talk about is he's going to start laying out what some of his commands are. But he says here, before we get to those commands, that those of us who are willing to set aside his commands, we're called least in the kingdom. But those who practice and teach his commands, well, they're called great in the kingdom. So I think in other words, Jesus is saying that our trust for him, our trust that he actually knows best for us, well, that shows up in our life, in our willingness or unwillingness to obey him. And I think that obedience, that word obedience, it's an uncomfortable word in general. Like we're in this stage with my son right now, he's 2, and so we have to teach him how to live, and so we always say, hey, Henry, you listen and you obey, and there's always a part of me that feels kind of dirty saying that word. Like we just don't like the concept of obedience, but I think obedience is particularly hard in college, and particularly hard when we talk about obeying Jesus in college. Because I think if we're honest, I think that our main issue with obeying Jesus is that it doesn't look that rewarding on the surface. I think a lot of the time we don't trust that following God is actually going to satisfy us. We hear people say, hey, that God wants your best life. Your best life is found in following him. But I think at first glance, a lot of the times, being a Christian and following Jesus just seems kind of boring. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on stage at a church, but I think sometimes we make following Jesus look kind of boring. Because it feels like Jesus mostly just wants to tell us no, that his commands and obedience to him is just saying no to all of the fun things in life. And I think that's hard because college, it's supposed to be the time of your life. You know, this is the time where you make a bunch of memories and you forget even more of them, or you live all of the stories that you go on to tell your kids for generations, or you explore and you experiment and you say yes to everything all the time. I think if you look around campus, or if you look at your classmates or your roommates or your coworkers or your teammates, like it seems like everybody else is just saying yes to whatever, whenever, and it seems like they're having a pretty good time doing it, right? It seems like their lives are going pretty well. It seems like they get to enjoy themselves a lot of the time. They say yes to the drink, and then another drink, and then another drink, and then another one. Or they say yes to the hookup, or the next one, or the next one, or the next one. They say yes to the relationship no matter who it is, and they don't work to put any boundaries in it. They say yes to that trip, or to watching that show, or to listening to that thing. They say yes to whatever they want to. But what do the Christian gets to say yes to? What are we doing? What are we enjoying? I think sometimes it feels like the only thing we get to say yes to is like line dancing and like coffee dates. I don't know. But I think if that's true, you know, over time we start to wonder, like, is obedience really just about missing out on all of the gratification that comes in living now in hopes that what? Like, there's some vague promise that God is going to satisfy me someday? That like his kingdom is going to be worth it and that I'm not going to regret saying no to all of these things now? But I think it's not just that we sometimes feel like God's kingdom is boring or that obedience is boring. I think sometimes it's costly too. Because saying no to things, that's not always just saying no to your own pleasure. I think sometimes it's saying no to other people. It's saying, no, I'm not going to do that thing that everybody else is doing this weekend, or no, I'm not going to participate in the way that you guys are talking about other people. I don't want to be part of this conversation. Or it's saying no to watching that show that everybody else is watching because, at the end of the day, it's not doing anything good for your brain or your heart. And I think if we do that enough, it's okay to do it once or twice, or it's okay when people aren't pushing back, but I don't blame you if you feel like saying no causes you to feel left out. When we're not caught up on the thing, the podcast or the show or the influencer that everybody's following, well then I think eventually people just kind of stop bringing us into those conversations. Like if we're not doing the thing that everybody else is doing, then they're just not going to include us. Or if we say no to going out or to going on certain trips or hanging out with certain people, then eventually people stop asking us to come around. When we won't talk about people behind their backs, when we don't join in the gossip in a conversation, well, sometimes we get judged for that, but other times people just cut us out and then we're the ones that they're gossiping about. They just start talking about us behind our back. See, I think obeying Jesus' commands can be really hard, and I think obedience can feel really unattractive because a lot of times it just feels really lonely. I think at times we look around and it feels like everybody else is just living this totally different life than us, and there's nobody that we're being obedient alongside. And so if you feel like obeying Jesus is hard, I think that's because it is. I think you're picking up on the truth here. That saying no to certain things, to having to live carefully, to trying to follow an upside down kingdom, obeying a God in a culture that doesn't, it's hard. But here's a question. What if Jesus isn't saying no to you, isn't asking you to say no to things because he's holding out on you? What if he's asking you to say no to those things because he knows that they're not actually going to give you what you're looking for? Because here's a hard truth that I think a lot of us learned the hard way. It's that instant gratification, it rarely leads to lasting satisfaction. I think some of you maybe know that because you've experienced it. I know I have. The hookup after hookup after hookup, it feels great. They all feel great, but it doesn't do anything to fix the loneliness that we feel. The party after party after party, they're all awesome, and it's great when I can wake up and not remember what I did last night because I'm sure that it was fun anyways, but it doesn't fix the thing I'm going through. It doesn't fix the anxiety that I feel. The porn that you're watching at night when you think that nobody else can see, or the thing that you're doing with your boyfriend or girlfriend that you hope that your roommates are unaware of, it doesn't actually lead to real intimacy. It doesn't. We want to feel wanted, but instead we're grasping for it in all of the wrong ways. See, I think saying yes to everything doesn't actually make life any fuller. I think in reality, it actually makes it emptier. Because the thing with all of those things is that you always have to go back for more. It's like a hamster wheel. There's a reason that we see people on campus or online doing those things over and over and over and over again. It seems like they're just saying yes to them all the time. But that's not actually a good thing. They're saying yes to them all the time because they have to say yes to them again and again and again and again because they're just doing them over and over again in hopes that it'll finally be enough, that pleasure will finally add up, that it'll finally help solve the problem, but it doesn't. See, I think some of you know that from experience, but you know who else knows that? Jesus does. When Jesus gives commands, he's not trying to rob you of joy. I think he's trying to protect us from building our lives on things that cannot carry the weight that we are trying to put on them. He's looking at us with compassion and he's asking us to trust that he knows where those roads end. He knows that they do not deliver us to the good life that we think they do. That's why obedience, the obedience that Jesus is calling us to in Matthew 5, 18, 19, 20, it's not about pressure. Jesus is not trying to force you into following him, but he's inviting you into a wiser, better, healthier way to live. It's Jesus telling us how to live best because he is the only one who can see the full picture. He knows what we need, and he is a good and gracious God who delights to give us good things. But I think the problem is that we often mix up what things are actually good for us. See, the reality is Jesus, he doesn't promise instant gratification. There are a lot of things that feel really good the second that you do them, that give you that feedback, that dopamine, that hit that you're looking for. I think often that's not really how following Jesus works. When we obey, there's not usually this moment, this rush of pleasure that comes. Because I think what Jesus is offering us isn't instant gratification, but it is a deeper, lasting satisfaction. It's a satisfaction and a joy that doesn't disappear the next day. It is one that doesn't leave you emptier than before. It's living water that means that we don't have to come back to the well trying to drink and quench our thirst over and over and over again, because Jesus, he can satisfy forever. But I think the thing that is counterintuitive about following Jesus is the joy that he's offering us, the pleasure that he's offering us. It takes time. It takes time. It is not instant gratification. I think of it kind of like going to the gym. Like if you go and you get one lift in, it might feel good, but it probably hurts more than anything, right? And do you notice results immediately? I sometimes do, but no, you don't. So how do you get results? Well, you go back the next day and you do it again. And you go back the next day and you do it again. You go back the next day and you do it again. And you trust the process. You trust that even when you can't feel the goodness, that even when you can't see the results, that it is going to be good for you in the end. I think obeying Jesus, it's hard. And the results can be slow, but Jesus tells us that it is always worth it. This is one of those sermons, this happens every now and then, where I feel like I'm preaching to myself, because I feel like I'm in a spot right now where I am fighting really hard to obey Jesus, and it is not easy. I've talked about it before on Tuesday nights, but the area that I'm fighting to obey in is doing this right here. Because I'm relatively new at this, and to be honest, it's terrifying. It's really scary to get up here because I care what people think about me. And there are a lot of you. And so I'm scared every time that I go to do this. It's hard. There's so many times over the last 48 hours that I looked at my wife and I was like, I don't think I can do this. I don't want to get up there. Kyle needs to get up there and he needs to preach because I'm not going to do it. See, it's really hard to obey Jesus sometimes, but I think there kind of comes a decision moment or a point where we have to make a choice. And there's two paths that kind of diverge. One is to go the easy path, the instant gratification path, the path that just feels better now. And for me, that would be, hey, I'm just going to pass this off to somebody else, or I'm going to go find something to do that's easier for me. The harder path, the painful path, is the one where I keep at it, where I keep doing this because I know that it's going to take time. But ultimately, down the road, I want to become somebody who's more faithful and not just more gifted at speaking, but doesn't look to people for approval, who can get up here and preach faithfully and do it out of a love for Jesus and a desire to pass on his word, not a desire to look good or to make things about me. I want to be that person. I want to be transformed at the end of that path. But it takes obedience, and it takes time. And so that's the invitation that Jesus has for us in this passage tonight. It's not to say yes to him and to immediately flourish and for everything in your life to go better. But it is an invitation to follow him and to trust that he really does know what's best for you. And I think the longer we follow Jesus and the more that we follow Jesus, the more areas of our life that we turn over to him in obedience, whether that's in where you spend your time or how you spend your money or who you spend your time with or what you're doing with those people or what you're putting in your body or what you're watching on your screens, whatever it is, the more that you turn that over to Jesus, the more things that you allow him to speak into, the more commands that we follow, I think the more life that we find. And so I don't know what it is for you, but the question I want to ask is just where can you start fighting to obey Jesus? And maybe you are, and that's amazing, but where can you continue to fight to obey Jesus? Where can you look into the future and say, Jesus, this is hard and it's costly, and at times it might even feel boring. I wish that my life were more exciting. I wish that I had more instant gratification, but I trust that you know what you're talking about and that you want my good. Because at the end of the day, Jesus, he's not asking you to settle for less. He's inviting you into the life that you actually want, a life that satisfies you. And I think we find it if we're willing to follow him long enough to figure it out. I think it's interesting that Jesus says all of this on the heels of last week's passage. And if you weren't here, I want to go ahead and read it with you. So we're backing up into Matthew 5, verses 14 to 16. This is Jesus speaking again to the crowds, but he's talking about what Christians are meant to be in the world. He says this, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. And neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So I want you to notice something, and it's not super obvious in the English. You have to know Greek to know this, but in the beginning of that verse, when Jesus says that you are the light of the world, that's not a singular you. He's not saying, hey, each and every single one of you individuals are the light of the world. Instead, he's saying that you, collectively, plural, are the light of the world. You're not just like a single lamp or a flashlight. It is a town on a hill. It is a collection of light that shines. And what Jesus is saying is that when a group of people start obeying him, when they start trusting him, and when they're doing it not out of a feeling of obligation, but rather because they actually trust and believe that Jesus knows best, well, people notice that. And it's not because it's loud and in your face, and it's not because we're doing it perfectly either. Like, let me be clear about that. Jesus is not calling any of us to obey perfectly. We can't. That's why we needed Jesus in the first place. He's the only one who can obey God perfectly. But when we fight to obey him, people see Jesus. They see what he does. People notice that he changes lives. That's what our obedience has always been meant to do. Point other people to Jesus, to spread his goodness out into the world, to invite more people into that goodness. And I know it's hard and it's slow, but it is good, and people do notice. And I think sometimes a story helps to illustrate it. And so I asked a student whose story I had heard before if she could just kind of summarize what her experience was like in college. She graduated a couple years ago, and this is what she said. Music team, you guys can come back up. "I really fought to obey Jesus my sophomore year living in my sorority house. I felt like I was the only person living there trying to follow Jesus, and it was so hard. I felt like I was the only person at events not drinking and not gossiping. It made me stand out at times, and it made it hard to fit in. There were a lot of times that I asked myself if it was even worth it, and plenty of times where it felt like the answer was just no. I felt like I was missing out on a lot of fun and a lot of chances for friendship. But over time, as I continued to obey, I saw God working in my life. I started to feel peace, joy, and contentment that was deeper than the fun I was missing out on. But it wasn't just in my life. Over time, God used the fact that I wasn't drinking or gossiping to lead to really cool conversations. People started to ask why I wasn't living like they were and how I was still so joyful. I was able to share about my relationship with Jesus and how good it is to follow him. Not everyone got it. Not everyone got it. But a girl in my sorority started asking lots of questions. And over time, as we grew closer, I was able to start inviting her to Veritas. And then what? And then she joined my small group and came to Jamaica and came to know Jesus. And then the best part, we fought to be obedient and to live on mission together in our sorority house. We had each other for support, and God used it to reach more girls than I ever could have alone. You see, it started with one person, one girl who felt alone in her obedience. But she didn't give up. She didn't give in to the fact that she felt like she was missing out. She didn't let the cost weigh too heavily on her. She just obeyed. She just showed up and did what Jesus asked her to not drink and to not gossip. I mean, two kind of small examples. There's so much more to Jesus' commands, but it's what she did. She just lived faithfully to Jesus in the midst of her sorority house. She wasn't preaching at people. She wasn't trying to be flashy and in their face. She wasn't telling them that they were making a mistake for not obeying Jesus. She was just obeying him herself. And over time, she experienced joy and hope and peace and contentment. And eventually people noticed that she looked different. And not that she looked different in a bad way. It was different in an attractive way because she had joy. And so at first it was hard because she was alone. But eventually others joined in. And her obedience, it was shared. Support replaced isolation, and God used their lives together to draw people to himself. See, that's the invitation that Jesus is holding out to you and to me and to all of us together. Not that we would obey perfectly, not that you would need to go and figure out how to obey Jesus on your own, but that we together would become a group of people who trust him together, so that through our lives, other people can see Jesus for who he really is, the one who knows what's best for our lives. We pray that we would be a people who would do that. Jesus, we want to trust you. We read your word and we hear that you are the creator of everything, that from the very beginning everything was good, and that you made us to flourish by following you, by living in harmony and in perfect relationship with you. And Jesus, it's hard to trust you. It's always been the story of humanity. We have a hard time trusting you, but that's why we needed you, Jesus. That's why we needed you, is to come to do what we couldn't. And now, Jesus, our response to that, it's not to say that obedience doesn't matter. It's not to say that it's too high or too costly, and it's not like we're obeying to earn anything, Jesus. We're just simply obeying in response to what you've done. We're obeying because we love you. So we ask that this would be a room of people who, in small, ordinary ways, are just fighting to one thing to the next, obey you. Not just for our own sake, but so that more and more and more people could come to know you, God. We love you. We long to trust you. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.